Dear colleagues and participants, before I start, I would like to thank the organizing committee for this opportunity and apologize to the audience for this format. Due to a family emergency, I couldn't make it to the conference, so I had to record this video. Anyway, I'll try to make my presentation as dynamic, as entertaining as a football game. Today, I'll speak about interpreting in a football team, expectations, perception, and strategies. Let me briefly list the contents of my presentation. The world of football, like the game itself, is extremely dynamic and complex. One of its characteristics is high mobility. There are usually several transfer windows for players during the season when they can sign a contract, join a new team, and relocate to a different club or a country. The number of male foreign players signing up to play abroad has been steadily increasing, as the long-term data analysis of major European football leagues has shown. Therefore, the demand for football interpreters, preferably speaking multiple languages, is also constant, especially in men's teams. To illustrate this point, I compared the number of interpreters, foreign players and coaches in men's and women's teams in the Russian Premier League and Women's Super League as of March of this year. The open source research has shown that 5 out of 16 football clubs competing in the Men's Premier League have 2 interpreters per team. 8 clubs have 1 interpreter and 3 clubs have no official interpreters employed. All of the interpreters are male. In the Women's Super League, only 1 out of 13 clubs clearly states that there is an interpreter on the team's website. It's a female interpreter. However, 8 out of 13 women's clubs have foreign players in their teams. No foreign coaches have yet been listed in the women's clubs. Nevertheless, we can note an increase in the foreign players' presence in the women's football in Russia, so the demand for team interpreters may also arise. So, if there is only 1 interpreter in the women's league, who is doing this job in other teams? A coach or a teammate or a manager? What skills does this job require? These are only a few questions I put forward in this study. Sports translation and interpreting has been studied by a number of researchers worldwide. I found a number of works by our Turkish colleagues. Some of them compared sports and community interpreting, studied football interpreting as a subtype of sports interpreting, examined the difficulties which sports interpreters experience. However, football interpreting is not just about press conferences and interviews. It covers a wider range of activities in and out of the field. Since there is still scarce research on the team interpreters' role and their performance from the primary user's perspective, this study gives us an opportunity to shed light on the players, coaches, and staff expectations and perception of a football interpreter in the professional women's team. For the first time, we consider a women's team for the research in football interpreting. So do these interpreters only need to translate or also act as assistants and intercultural mediators? Let's figure it out. So as a next step, I reviewed the role of sports and football interpreters and the necessary skills they should develop as professionals. We can distinguish several types of sports translators and interpreters. First, club translators who deal with the documentation, different contracts, agreements, negotiations with agents, and a range of other tasks within the club. They can perform both written and oral translation or interpreting. The second type is team interpreters who work directly with the players and take part in all activities in and out of the field. We can also find and distinguish personal interpreters for a head coach or for other officials, characteristics of men's teams mostly. So in this study, I mainly focus on the second type, a team interpreter who works on site or on the field. This position requires carrying out the duties directly on the field, so interpreting during training, gym workouts, games, as well as interpreting checkups, clinic visits, appointments, and recovery from injuries. Team interpreters attend and interpret meetings, team and individual talks, game reviews, and also help foreign players adapt to the new environment and deal with everyday tasks. For example, help them rent an apartment, help with transportation, shopping, other services, and everyday chores, even beauty in case of the women's teams. We started our analysis with the observational study. So we aim to determine what a regular day is like for a team interpreter, what tasks the interpreter usually performs, what the most widespread modes of interpreting and communicative strategies are. So I could distinguish the following models of interpreted interactions which directly involve team interpreters. So we can point out several types and modes of interpreting in sports communication. If we turn to the team interpreter's role, the most common type would be the dialogue interpreting or liaison interpreting, which is used while interpreting meetings and conversation with coaches and medical staff, management, player-to-player talks, flash interviews, and other formats. It is followed by consecutive interpreting, a mode usually performed during press conferences, and simultaneous interpreting, used for major international tournaments, conferences, and other events in the field. They can also do whispered interpreting during pre-match talks, meeting, individual sessions, and performance reviews. As I already mentioned, the context or the modality of interpreted interactions doesn't always have to be football or tactics related. It can cover medical topics, even when it comes to surgery, fitness, recovery, law, finance, and day-to-day communication, even beauty and wellness. I could also detect and describe a specific mode of interpreting for multilingual teams. It can be called delayed interpreting and is used during team meetings, sessions, and pep talks. In the first place, the interpreting is carried out into the first language, first target language or L1, and then pauses between statements made in the source language. The interpreting is performed into the second or even into the third language, but it is done in a delayed way. If this occurs, how should the interpreter set priorities and choose the language? Normally, those who play in the starting lineup are supposed to receive the information first. The substitutes, therefore, can receive the interpretation in a summarized way with certain omissions, simplifications, or highlighted information. However, how fair is this approach, and what could we do to improve it? So, if you want to become a football interpreter, you'll have to meet the following requirements and face certain professional challenges. First of all, you have to be multilingual. Football requires you to speak or at least understand more than one language. And it doesn't only refer to interpreters, it refers also to the coaches, to the other staff members. Secondly, names, nicknames, dates, numbers, moves are to be interpreted as accurately as possible. Thirdly, the interpreter should be ready to adapt to constant changes in the program, to walk and sometimes run a lot. Then, you have to be informed, and you have to know the terminology. It's vitally important for the football interpreter to know and understand the terminology and specific jargon in the source and the target language or languages. In different teams, the coaching staff members can establish a different style and use different vocabulary to talk about tactics. No gadgets or devices can be used in the premises, such as pitch, locker rooms, gym, or meeting rooms. Therefore, the artificial intelligence is not likely to replace sports interpreters in the foreseeable future. And there is no time for note-taking, especially if you work with 2 or more languages. Let's refer to the most widespread strategies and techniques that football interpreters use. The strategies are to inform, to explain, attract, engage, and entertain to a certain extent. The most common interpreting techniques can be the borrowing, calque, generalization, compression, omission, and description. Let me quickly list some examples. So the borrowings could be out, corner. For example, players who speak Brazilian Portuguese prefer to name these moves and these tactical things in English because, for example, they don't really understand the Spanish equivalents of fuera de línea, saque de esquina, and other things. Some types and names of passes can be generalized or described. For example, sometimes players will know if it's a long ball or a curler or a square pass. Some equipment is named by its brand, so these brands can become nominal in function. But there are differences in perception and naming as well. For example, compression boots or botas de compresión are just pants in Russian. So we have to be attentive to these details. So following, I conducted a survey at the end of the season in December 2023 in order to find out the expectations that football players and coaches have of football interpreters and what their perception of interpreters' duties is. Professional football players, coaching, medical staff members, and also some management staff of Russian women's club took part in it. The total number of respondents was 25, almost the whole team. The survey was anonymous, all the answers and data were encrypted, and I used the numeric scale from 0 to 5 in order to distribute and measure the scores. The survey consisted of two parts. The first set of questions from 1 to 9 regarded the role and expectations the team has of a sports interpreter. The second part contained questions from 10 to 20 on the characteristics of sports interpreting and their perception. So before I proceed with the results, I would like to point out that the first question was a general one and aimed to find out the role of respondents and the team, if they were players, coaches, or other staff members. According to the average score, the team members are convinced that sports interpreters have to speak the language fluently and have a great knowledge of sports terminology and football terminology. So for your info, there are several foreign players in this team. However, relevant education and translation and interpreting or linguistics doesn't seem to be very necessary. It's also highly important to the responses that the interpreter is a sociable and friendly person who gets on well with everyone and can be a troubleshooter or an intercultural mediator. I got quite a surprising score in questions 5 and 6, thus gender and physical fitness of the interpreter are not considered important by the respondents. So we don't have enough time to comment on all the findings, but we focus on the most outstanding ones in the section 2. So we have scores that are higher than the average in the questions 10 to 12 that explore the expectations regarding precision or accuracy, omission, generalization. Then we have question 15 on the acceptable speech register, changes from formal to informal and vice versa. The questions 19 and 20 on the intonation and gestures. So the interpreter can be expressive and gesture quite a lot. According to the answers, the most valuable quality of a sports interpreter, it's question 9 of the part 1 of the survey, are resistance to stress with 84%, patience, flexibility, politeness, and kindness. Moreover, I compared the scores in the group of coaches and staff with the players' evaluations. And unfortunately, I will have only time to highlight the most surprising ones. The coaches and management expect football interpreters to have relevant education, as question 2, but it doesn't matter to the players. They also believe that interpreters should help new players with adaptation in new countries, question 7, while the interpreters are certain that they can do this on their own. Both coaches and players are convinced that the interpreting should be precise and accurate. It's question 10, but it's crucial to the coaching and medical staff members. Also, players are found to be more tolerant to the change of order of information during the interpreting. It's question 14. While the coaches consider it unacceptable. And finally, expressiveness in question 19 is also important for both players and coaches, though the coaches attached greater importance to it, as you see on this table. So, coming to the discussion section. I designed this section as expectations versus reality. We realize that our expectations do not always match reality. For example, the interpreter is supposed to work in several language pairs, but no gadgets or devices, radio guides or audio equipment or phones are allowed in the premises. So to conclude, I would like to share some ideas and thoughts on the future of football interpreting as a separate field and on the women's team interpreters as an emerging profession as well. Thank you very much for your attention. I will be very happy to get your feedback and answer your questions at any time. You can see the contact information and the QR code on this slide. So feel free to contact me. I'll be very happy to see your messages. And thank you again. Goodbye.